So the topic that we're talking about right now is just how do you change it so that instead of having an array list of bullets, how can you make an array list of all the different game objects? We don't want to have separate array lists and therefore separate loops for sort of animating and storing all the different kind of objects. If the way we're doing it now is the way we did it, we'd have to have an array list of asteroids and an array list of explosion particles and all the different little objects that are going to be in our game. But I would like to just have one loop that would go through and animate all the objects. So to make that happen, we are going to change our array list. So instead of storing specifically bullet objects, it's going to store objects of any particular category. So the first thing to do is to make that category and then make different classes belong to that category. That's the main thing. And to do that, we're going to make a new tab, which is going to have a class in it. And it's going to be a different kind of class. It's going to be a class that represents a category rather than an actual specific physical object. So I'm going to make the new tab. It's going to be called game object, which is a good, abstract name. And we're going to have class game object in here. Object. There we go. Spelling matters. All right. So this class, again, is going to be the category. And we're never going to actually create game object objects in the game because that will be like, I keep using the mammal example. I got to come up with a better example. I can't think of a better example. I was like, I don't want to go down the reptile road, but I'll say it again anyways because it's a pretty good example. And the idea is that if you were to kind of visualize this as a biological kind of tree of life, there's categories of things like animals and plants, and there are further subdivisions of reptile and mammal, and that sort of symbolize things that are in similar groups. But those are all just ideas. There's no such thing as something that is just a mammal that is not also a tiger or a bear or some other kind of specific thing. These are just categorizations for the purpose of understanding what's going on in the tree of life. So you can't make a mammal that's not also some specific animal. There's no generic mammal creature walking around that's a ball of fur. It's just an idea. And in the same way, we're going to make the game object, which is just an idea, a category to which things will belong. And in order to make that happen, we're going to include what's called the abstract keyword. Abstract meaning this class represents a category or an idea, and its purpose will be just that. We're not going to make game objects in the game. Abstract specifically in programming just means you can't make objects from this. Its only purpose is to become what's called a superclass of other classes. So, and we'll see how that becomes a thing in a minute. So to set this up, we're gonna give it a constructor, even though we can't use the constructor to construct it. But we'll just call it game object, and we'll give it void show void act and void boolean alive. And in Boolean alive, we'll just return true automatically. And so these are the functions that all of our game objects are going to have. These could represent our default show and our default act and our default alive functions that all the other classes could use. And already some students were thinking about, what similarities are there in all these different game objects? And started moving some of those similarities into void show and void act. And that's great. But right now, this is all we really need. It's just sort of a skeleton of what are these other game objects going to have. In the same way that sort of the definition of mammal is like you got to have fur, you got to bear live young, and you have to produce milk. Therefore, those are the three kind of category requirements. Those are like the defaults of the mammal class, if you will. And you could build those into the mammal class if you were making it, the abstract mammal class, and then all the other things would just inherit that automatically. But right now, let's just go and like get the bullet and maybe the spaceship belonging to that class first, and then we could talk about how we could like put some of the common stuff into this class. So first of all, let's make bullet belong to the game object class, and all you have to do for that is to say class bullet extends game object. And extends is a keyword that just means, hey, game object, bullet, that's a game object. It's going to be based on game object, and we're going to extend it. We're going to build on top of it. And so anything that game object has, which currently is nothing, bullet will also have. And most importantly for our purposes right now, any bullet object can go wherever a game object is expected. It's part of the family. It is one of the many wonderful game objects that we'll have in our game. The same thing with spaceship. I'm going to go over to spaceship and say spaceship extends game object. So now the spaceship object could go inside of any variable or list that is expecting game objects. And then when we go to make our asteroid, you're going to say class asteroid extends game object. And then it can also be put into the array list of game objects. And therefore, one big array list will be a collection of all of our things. Before we go and actually make a bit more interesting use out of the game object class, let's just modify our code in the main tab to work with the game object class, and I'll show you how that works. So in our main tab, our array list is no longer just for bullets. It's going to be for game objects, which includes bullets and spaceships right now, and we'll later include other things. And all I'm going to do to make that happen is I'm going to right-click, and this was a feature everyone was like, wow. We're just going to right-click and go rename. You can rename a variable, and then all examples of the bullets list will be renamed to whatever we're going to call it. I'm just going to call it objects. Yeah, isn't that nice? Phew, and it just goes all the way through. Doesn't fix everything, and if you scroll down, you'll see there's a couple of problems that have resulted, but they're easy to fix. So here in our setup, for example, it says objects equals new array list bullet. Well, that's kind of left over from our old way of doing it. So we're going to switch it to game object. And maybe I'll just pause because I'm going pretty fast. Oh, thanks, Kate. It's nice when we get to close Mr. Harris's door for a change. We should have closed his door. Oh, I guess they were in the hallway, though, so he couldn't really do it. He's always closing my door. I don't know if you guys ever noticed that, but he's like, yeah, I know. I'm just that loud. I can't contain myself. I'm just so excited about programming. Anyways, here we go. The next thing is in the draw function. This is actually a fairly big change. It's a minor change, but there's a lot of little things to change inside to reflect that change. This is great objects.size, but oh, what's wrong here? Well, we're getting a game object out of the list, but we're storing it in a bullet. And that doesn't work because in the objects, there could be asteroids, bullets, you name it, spaceships, all sorts of stuff. So instead of this being current bullet, we're going to rename this variable to current object. I'm going to rename, and it's going to be current object because it's more general now. It's more general. We're not just animating bullets, we're animating whatever objects are in this thing. And I'm going to change this not to be of type bullet, but of type game object. So that was significant there. And I'll just pause there in case people are having some troubles with that. Chances are, oh yeah, thanks.
Okay, so is that specific to the bullet, or like, if I wanted to add an asteroid, do I have to do another line? Like,
Yeah, good question. So if you are anticipating adding androids, I said, androids, we can add those too. If we're anticipating adding asteroids, how is it that we go and add asteroids? And that answer is sort of similar to how we add bullets. Right now, so I'm in the spaceship class, and here's how I add bullets. Objects.add new bullet. And I do that only when I press the space bar. In Asteroids, we want to add asteroids at the beginning of the game. And we can do basically the same thing. If we had an asteroid class, you could say objects.add new asteroid, and it would be a, with the parentheses here, just like this. Just replace the word asteroid or with, replace the word bullet with asteroid or the name of any game object class. And you could do that. And then because you want them to start at the beginning of the game, yeah, you put it in setup. So you could go over, I don't have asteroid class yet, but I could theoretically, put in new asteroid. And you could do it in a loop to make several of them, or, cut and paste a bunch of them. Here's 5 asteroids. I don't actually have an asteroid class, so that's not going to work too well for me. But that's how I would add asteroids in later on, or anything that's the game begins with. If there's planets, or I don't know what else could be in this game, but other things could be added at the beginning. All right, good question. Okay, so I think this will just kind of work now. Nothing really needs changing after that, which is kind of cool. That we didn't do a lot of changes, and everything still works. And just to demonstrate now that, oh wow, actually this is a pretty lame demonstration of it, but I'll just demonstrate that we can now put other things into the list, and that is the spaceship, for example. All spaceship objects extend game objects, so now we can stick the spaceship in that list too, and now we don't have to manually animate it. So just to show you what I mean, in the draw function, which you guys are probably putting into your mode framework and stuff, I have ship.show and ship.act. And it's kind of redundant now, because if I just add the ship to the list, the objects list, it will then show and act as a result of this list processing every object that's inside of the list. So we can switch this, and I'm not going to say ship.show and ship.act. I'm getting rid of that. Right there. This no longer there. And instead, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say objects.add in my setup the ship. Here it is. I just call mine ship. And the ship will work, even though I'm not calling specifically ship.show and ship.act. It will work because the ship is in the list, and this list processes game objects and tells all the objects to show and act. So it shows up and is perfectly good. All right. And then the way we finished off last class was we were talking about, well, what else can we do with this game object? And the game object class is great for also defining things that are common between members of the family or members of this category. Because why reinvent the wheel every time? Why go code in the same stuff over and over again when you could put it all in the category class, and then everything just gets that code, and you don't have to program it over and over again. So actually, Kate was doing this last class. I was like, "Whoa, this is so good." She jumped ahead and she was like, "Hey, I think we put in the p vectors for location and velocity, but then she also noticed that, and maybe other people did too, that there's this stuff, this wraparound teleport on edges. It's going to be common between the bullets and the spaceship and the asteroids. They're all going to teleport on the edges. We had a little bit of extra work to do to make it work because mine is sort of based on ship size, which is maybe not perfect for the asteroids. It's not big enough. But we can always modify that later on. But yeah, the same code, instead of coding it in spaceship and coding it in bullet and coding it in asteroids, and whatever other things, we can put it into the game object class. So I'm going to do that right now, and if you haven't done this yet, that's okay, but we can take a look and see. Yeah, Zach.
So when you're calling objects.show, objects.act,
yeah,
are you calling the function in abstract class game object, or are you calling the function in bullet class?
Good question. Such a good question. So the way that processing in Java decides is called polymorphism. It's the mechanism, which is such a fancy word for saying it just picks the most. It goes to the subclass first.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, it looks at the game object and it's like, oh, it's a spaceship. Does spaceship have an act function? Oh yeah, it does. Cool. We'll do the spaceship's act function. If it didn't have an act function, though, it would default to the game object's act function.
Oh, okay.
So if you don't want to code anything special for your whatever game object it is, you just want to use whatever is the default, then you can just not make an act function and it'll do this one instead.
Okay.
Yeah? Make sense?
It just does it automatically.
It just does it automatically. The mechanism is called polymorphism, and it's just a word to say, yeah, it just does it automatically.
Yeah, okay. All right.
So if you ever encounter that word in the future, that's all it means.
That's what you do.
All right, so here we go. So I'm going to take this thing here. This is p vector, location and velocity. Seems pretty common between everything. So I actually removed it from spaceship, and I removed it from bullet. And I said, why not just put it in game object? Then I only have to code it once. And then in the future, other game objects will also get a location and velocity p vector. I don't have to remember to type it in. I don't have to waste time typing it in. As soon as I make a class that extends game object, it'll get a location and velocity, its own unique separate location and own unique separate velocity. And that's a good thing. And if I ever make changes to the game object class, then all the other things will update as well. So it's super powerful development tool. And then we talked about Kate's idea of taking there's actually two things Kate noticed. There's the location.add velocity, that's always happening. And then the wraparound code, that's always happening. The H++ is a little bit awkwardly located there. I'm just going to move it down to the bottom. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to put it in act in the game object class. So I got rid of location.add velocity and the wraparound code, if statements. I'm going to get rid of that out of bullet, and I'm going to get rid of it out of spaceship. Because that's something that pretty much all the game objects are going to do. I'm going to get rid of that cooldown random text stuff too. We got it, I think. We got cooldown. So now my act function looks a lot simpler. There's still one missing piece though. I have to make sure that the default stuff still runs on top of this act function. So I want the default move and teleport code to happen in addition to this stuff here. So the last thing I'm going to add in is for the act function, I'm going to say super.act, which means that first it'll run the code in the class that we're extending in the act function, and then we'll do this code as well. And I'm going to do the same thing in bullet. Bullet is super.act as well. That means in addition to doing what's in the game object act function, it's going to do that stuff plus whatever a bullet needs to do. So I'm just going to summarize that because sometimes people kind of jump in sort of in the middle of it and they're like, whoa, 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 I missed the beginning. I'm not too sure what's happening. So just to remind everybody, in game object, I took all that code about moving, so location.add velocity, and teleporting around the edges. So, it goes from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. And I took that out of bullet, and I took it out of spaceship, and I put it into game object, into game object's act function. And then I made sure that spaceship still does that stuff by saying super.act. And I made sure bullet still does that by putting super.act in their act functions as well, which means I don't have to write it twice. Another benefit is if I ever add additional stuff into the game object act function, then all my other game objects will get those things as well. So I can upgrade them all at once by coding stuff into the game object's act function, the game object show function. This is a pretty advanced concept, so if anyone's like, I don't know, having questions or something, yeah, I would totally expect that to be the case. One more, I'm going to throw another thing out there to help you guys understand. If you're feeling a little bit confused, let me try it from this angle. The extends keyword. It's a really great way to think of extends as literally the English meaning of extending something, right? What does it mean to extend something else? It means you're going to take the original thing and build on top of it, right? You're going to make it more, make it bigger, make it longer, make it faster. You're building on top of something else. And so spaceship and bullets, when I say we're extending game object, we're getting game object, we get all the juicy good stuff inside a game object, and then we build on top of it and build additional things. So what does spaceship build on top of it? Well, it adds things like lives and cooldown. It adds, the show is entirely not, it's all taken care of by the subclass, so that's not a good example. But the act is going to build on top of the existing sort of moving and teleporting stuff, and then it's going to add on keyboard controls and recharging gun. So it's just adding on top of all the stuff that's common for all the game objects. Bullet doesn't add much at all. Bullets basically just move and teleport, but they also expire, so there's an additional thing added on top of that. Our asteroids will eventually have to detect collisions, so they'll probably look like void act, and then they'll say super.act, and then we haven't done collisions yet, but that will be sort of the next thing after that would be some collision detection code. Okay, hey, what do you think? Good? Bad? Somewhere in between? Thanks, Allie. Yeah, exactly. I have put that code here because it seems like everything's going to have that. Asteroids are going to have that, and bullets have that, and spaceships have that. So that's great.
What variable should we put for ship size? Because doesn't that only work for the ship?
That's a really good point. I really thank you for bringing that up, Allie. And this is a problem that I'm going to have to solve as well. So ship size, my original use of this was going to be for the spaceship. Instead of me having to, type in numbers, I set ship size to 50. I was like, that's going to be great for the ship. But now I'm kind of regretting that. Now I'm like, oh man, ship size is a little bit too, what's the word? It's a little bit too specific to the spaceship. But now I'm generalizing this to something that's more than just a ship. So now I'm like, I'm kind of left off with a bit of an annoying thing here. So what you might want to do is rename that variable. I would probably rename it to maybe object size. And I might choose just a number that will account for any size object. So an asteroid or a bullet or a spaceship would be fine. So you might not have typed in a variable. You might just use the number. You might just be like, it's less than 50 or less than 100 or something like that. In which case, you could just change the number to accommodate any size object in your game. And that's not bad. I will say it's not bad. If your asteroids are significantly larger than your spaceship, that might be a little bit goofy, but I think it's going to be okay. That's okay. It sounds like you guys are doing good things over there. Keep doing those good things. Okay, so any other questions about that? Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, there's sort of this error that I think, I'm not sure if it's just me or not, but
yeah, it's possible.
So when you do the bullet, sort of the sort of instantiating all the key vectors and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You copy it from ship dot location, which doesn't that not exist anymore?
It still does exist.
Still does exist.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Actually, this ties in directly with the asteroids, and this was a number one asked question in I think last class. So I'm not surprised you're encountering it. So the fact that we can still say ship dot location is because we declared ship up here in the main tab. And we are not going to do that with asteroids because we don't need to know any particular asteroids information.
Right.
But we do need to know the ship's location because bullets depend on that and stuff. So we declared it here. We're not going to declare asteroids up here, though. When we go to make asteroids, we'll go objects.add new asteroid. And I think a lot of people in this room right now were like, they saw how we did the ship, and they're like, well, how do we add the asteroid? And this is how we're adding the asteroid. And the difference is we need to keep track of the ship variable separately because we want to look at its location. We want to look at its lives. Other parts of the game care about the ship. And then we don't need to make asteroid objects, so we can just say objects.add new asteroid. We don't keep sort of a link to any particular asteroid. We just make them and throw them into the list because the asteroids can take care of themselves. They can check for collisions. They can move themselves. Nothing else really cares about the asteroids, and at least any particular one asteroid. Thanks again, Zach.
Oh, actually, no, I just figured it out.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
I didn't put spaceship as part of the game object class.
Okay.
So
That's fair. That's fair.
that's why.
No, and it's because I'm like going so fast. It's because I'm going so fast. Thanks for following along. Well, that's great. So, would people like to see how to make the asteroid now? If anyone's like, yeah, let's do the asteroid. This is a little bit accelerated for people that were away last class, but we'll go ahead and make the asteroid. Hopefully, in trying it, you encountered a question. So I kind of feel like some people are at different places now, and that's okay. I don't mind if people are in different places. If you have an asteroid working, please feel free to just continue doing your own thing. If you don't have an asteroid working, definitely take a look. But either way, let's all quiet down so that anybody who wants to check this out won't have to sort of compete with their attention or listening to your conversation and mine. Thanks, folks. So I'm going to go ahead and make my asteroid. So I'm going to make a new tab called Asteroid. Careful, though, that your name, like if you named your project Asteroid and you're making an asteroid tab, you're going to have some trouble. So hopefully Asteroids is pluralized or something, like, and that works out. But just be aware of that in case that happens to you.
Is it case sensitive?
It is probably.
Okay.
But I wouldn't.
Don't
I could just anticipate the weird problems that could happen. So maybe tread lightly on that and just make sure there's some difference there other than capitalization. Or we could try it. For, in the spirit of science, we could go ahead and try it and see if we wreck everything.
I'm gonna narrow this out of context.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. I'm going to make class Asteroid, and it's going to extend game object. Oh yeah, are you adding asteroids in the draw function?
No, I made a while loop on purpose, and every frame I'm making, I think 1,000 asteroids.
Oh yeah. I mean, why not? Like, let's see how our Intel onboard graphics cards handle that many things. Like it's a good benchmark. We can make our own benchmarking tool and then run this on your like Razer like gaming computer and like see how that works instead. Anyways, here we go. Class Asteroid extends game object. We don't have to put in a location velocity. I'm so happy because, hey Norman. Oh, sorry, Aaron. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So we don't have to type in p vector velocity, p vector location. It automatically, because we're extending game object, it automatically gets one of those because that's defined here. So we can just use those things like location and velocity without declaring them. Asteroids come built in with those because all game objects do. So I can just go ahead and make my constructor, asteroid. And I can make location equal to a new p vector. And this is a bit of a thing. Like where should they begin? And in the classic game, there's sort of like left asteroids and right asteroids. So you could kind of do like we did in our color game, where you just flip a coin, so to speak, randomly generate a number, and then decide if you make a left asteroid or a right asteroid. But for me, I'm not worried about that. I just want to make sure this works. So I'm just going to make a random asteroid anywhere, which is totally not a good game plan for our end product, because you don't want an asteroid to start on top of your spaceship and just crush you when the game begins and you had no chance. But for now, that seems like a perfectly normal thing to do, I think. So I think there's actually a way to randomly generate p vectors a little bit easier, but I'm just going to stick in a random number for the x and a random number for the y. So I'm going to put in random for x anywhere from 0 to width, and random for y, which is anywhere from 0 to height. And I'll double check on if there's a better way to do that. And then velocity, velocity equals new p vector. I'm not going to give it much horizontal movement, just a little bit of horizontal movement. So I'll make the x quantity like between -1 and +1. And then the y part of the velocity, the up and down, I'll make it a little bit more interesting. -5 and +5. And that might be all right. There's other ways to do this, but I think I'll just start with that. That way I can kind of rein in the horizontal part, and the vertical part will be a little bit different. And then the show function will require us to show an asteroid. I'm just going to use an ellipse right now, but you can put in a picture of a, just like we did for the spaceship. So void show will just be an ellipse at location.x, location.y, and I'm just going to make it 100 by 100 because I don't know how that's going to look. So I just put in some generic numbers. I guess I'll also put in fill, like gray. There we go, fill gray. Next is the show function, the act function. You can actually leave the act function off right now. It would be totally fine, but eventually my asteroids do want to do something a little more interesting. So I'm going to put it in, but actually maybe just for funsies, I'll leave it out this time so you can just see that it does in fact act without it, because if there is no act function defined in asteroid, then it will use GameObjects act function, which is just move and teleport on the edges. So I'll leave it out for now, but we will want to add that in eventually, so we'll put that in later on. Also, I'll leave out the alive function because it'll just get this default alive function, which is to say it's by default immortal. And that is totally, good enough for now. We'll later on put in how do we make it die. So I'll just leave it at that. That's it. But remember, that's not it. Even though that's all it's defined in this class, it's extending GameObject, so it gets the other stuff from GameObject too. So that story is kind of spread over 2 tabs. But just to see if I get some asteroids, I won't make 100,000 asteroids, but I'll make a few asteroids. I'll throw in 3 asteroids just in my setup, just to see if I get some asteroids and see how they look. Hey, there's some asteroids. They're ugly as can be. But, oh yeah, I gotta get out of the way. Of course I don't, because they don't collide with me or anything yet. And look at that, they're teleporting. The ship size variable is the reason why they just kind of disappear and reappear. That was designed so that my ship would disappear and reappear nicely. These things are kind of bigger now, so I will probably adjust my ship size pretty soon. And eventually I'll be able to shoot these asteroids, but not today. I am just going to go adjust my ship size to be 100 now, which is a terrible name for a variable. So I'm going to rename it to be object size. And I think, oh wait, but my ship uses that. Oh, and that's just no good. I don't know. I've tangled this up rather terribly, so bad foresight on my behalf. Nonetheless, the teleporting works pretty well. Okay. And I guess one last thing. In my asteroid class, I am going to go put in my act function. I'm going to say in asteroid void act. And I'm going to call super.act. And that's going to leave me really with the exact same thing, but it gives me a space to build new behaviors. So we won't do that today, but we will put in a space so that in a future class, possibly next class, we can put in collision detection code where each asteroid will be searching for other bullets and we'll be checking to see if it's colliding with those bullets. It's going to loop through the objects list and be like, hey, are you a bullet? And if you are you overlapping me? Because if you are, then I should probably die and spawn new asteroids that are smaller than me. And that'll be something that we'll do, next class. So I'm going to stop the video there, and hopefully that is useful to somebody.